Focus on Headline. All right, let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio, it's been a while since the Sochi sisters have been together. Kwon-soa, Choi Ji-hee joins us in the studio. Good evening to you guys.
Good evening.
It's weird. It's been a while since the two have been together. Well, it's we got certainly a packed day of news today. We're going to start things off, of course. The big news: the bilateral summit between President Yoon and his Japanese counterpart. We're talking about Prime Minister Fumio Kishida this on Wednesday, with the main attention having been on the planned release of wastewater from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Now, the consensus was initially that there wasn't going to be a whole lot of things to be discussed, or that there's going to be no new developments on that front. We have some interesting remarks from the bilateral summit there. So you're going to start us off, fill us in on the talks between the two leaders.
Sure. So South Korea's President Yoon had a number of requests to Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in regards to the release of treated radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant. And that was made during a 30-minute one-on-one in Lithuania's capital Vilnius on Wednesday on the sidelines of the NATO summit. And President Yoon also asked for Japan to ensure that South Korean experts are included in the monitoring process of the release. That meaning the entire plant process, and also to share the process in real time. He also called on the prompt halt of the discharge in case something goes wrong, such as if radioactivity exceeds standard levels, and also called on Tokyo to notify Seoul immediately in such a case. President Yoon underlined to put the safety and health of citizens at the top of Tokyo's priority in the process. Prime Minister Kishida reportedly promised to do everything possible to ensure the release would not harm the health of the Japanese and South Korean people, as well as their environment. He also vowed to reveal the results of Tokyo's monitoring in a swift and transparent manner, and to immediately stop the release in the case radiation levels exceed limits that are deemed safe. President Yoon, meanwhile, also mentioned he respects the International Atomic Energy Agency's recent review that concluded that Japan's planned release of treated wastewater is in line with global safety standards. Now, that part was what Japan's press release put at the forefront, actually, rather than President Yoon's requests that I just mentioned. So it was more about President Yoon respecting the IAEA report, and that the two countries will continue their close communication on the matter. And that they will, it looks like, South Korea's presidential office on Thursday announced there will be working level follow-up discussions on the wastewater release. Park Gu-yeon, the first deputy chief of the Office for Government Policy Coordination, that said that this will happen, quote unquote, as soon as possible.
Yeah, even in the previous bilateral summits held between the two leaders, I mean, the one thing that President Yoon had requested from Japan and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida all this time was transparency. And I think even from the government standpoint is we want transparency was number one. But of course, the kicker here is President Yoon Suk-yeol requesting that South Korean experts be a part of this, I guess, the investigation portion of things. And if, of course, Japan says, okay, certainly this will alleviate a lot of the concerns from the South Korean side. But what else was discussed aside from the discharge of the wastewater?
Well, the two sides also highly assessed their shuttle diplomacy and assessing it as showing tangible results. As we know, the shuttle diplomacy was restored early this year, and that happened for the first time in 12 years. In fact, this time was already the sixth summit between President Yoon Suk-yeol and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and they decided to continue the talks on that front, and they also agreed to continue their discussions on the diplomatic front. So when it comes to security, culture, and exchange of human resources, as well as economy. And in particular, regarding the economy, the two agreed to kick off a high-level bilateral economic consultation body, and they said they will do that within this year. Of course, North Korea was also discussed with both leaders having denounced Pyongyang's intercontinental ballistic missile launch, and also mentioning that this was a clear violation against UN Security Council resolutions. Meanwhile, the two also welcomed U.S. President Joe Biden's proposal of a trilateral summit in Washington, D.C.
Of course, in regards to the summit talks between the leaders of South Korea and Japan, there has always been sort of conflicting responses and opinions from the rival parties, the ruling and the opposition party. Certainly seems the same way with this one as well. But also, you had the ARF set to kick off today. Foreign ministers of the two countries are also expected to hold a meeting there. Chihi, you have more on this.
All right, so reactions to the outcome of the South Korea-Japan summit on the discharge of contaminated water from Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant were divided, like you said. So to be specific, while the spokesperson for the People's Power Party said that the talks achieved what could realistically be achieved, the spokesperson for the Democratic Party accused the government of abandoning the safety of its citizens, even though it was the last chance to express the country's position. Now, on the sidelines of the ASEAN Regional Forum in Jakarta, Indonesia, which kicked off today, a meeting between South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin and Japanese Foreign Minister Hayashi Yoshimasa is expected to take place. And as South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol conveyed his country's request for the ocean discharge of the contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant to Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida during yesterday's bilateral summit, the foreign ministers' meeting is also expected to be a follow-up of this issue. Minister Park will also attend the ASEAN ROK and ASEAN Plus 3 meetings today, and the East Asia Summit and ASEAN Regional Security Forum foreign ministers meeting tomorrow as well. And this afternoon at the ASEAN Plus 3 meetings, representatives from Japan, South Korea, and China were present. And it was interesting to see whether China, which had opposed Japan's discharge of polluted water, will formally raise the issue of contaminated water or not. And Foreign Minister Park Jin is also expected to seek bilateral and multilateral meetings with foreign ministers from other countries, including the United States, China, the European Union, United Kingdom, during the meeting as well. And China's Foreign Minister Qin Gang was replaced by Wang Yi, a member of the Chinese Communist Party's Central Political Bureau. And it was also interesting to see if he could build momentum for the restoration of bilateral ties with South Korea's Park Jin. And separately, South Korea and Japan are expected to hold bilateral and trilateral talks, respectively, to focus on ways to coordinate efforts to respond to North Korea's provocations as well, such as the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile.
All right, let's delve deeper into diplomacy because, as Chi mentioned, this is quite interesting because Seoul's top diplomat Park Jin, he is not going to hold a meeting with his current counterpart, as in China's Foreign Minister Qin Gang, and as she mentioned, was replaced with former Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Now, we know that although continuous talks between the diplomats of Seoul and Tokyo is important, but all the more important right now, especially because of the tensions. We had some diplomatic row between the two sides as well. The Seoul-Beijing talks are going to be very important. So what can we expect in these talks?
Right. So, as we mentioned, Park Jin is expected to meet with Wang Yi, who's the current head of the ruling Communist Party's Central Commission for Foreign Affairs. But he's been a long-time foreign minister, and many may be even more familiar with him in comparison to Qin Gang. So, it's not going to be much different from a bilateral foreign ministers meeting, is what pundits are saying, especially with all the expertise that Wang Yi has. And China's foreign ministry, meanwhile, said State Councilor and Foreign Minister Qin Gang cannot attend this ASEAN ministerial meeting because of health reasons. Now, sources from both South Korea and China said Wednesday that the two sides are in talks to have a meeting between Park and Yi arranged on the occasion of the ARF in Jakarta Thursday and Friday. The meeting is reportedly not fixed yet, but both sides reportedly see eye to eye in that a high-level meeting is needed. Seoul's top diplomat upon arrival in Jakarta hinted to reporters that there is expected to be a natural opportunity for a meeting. That one I just translated from the Korean version of what he said, so probably maybe it could be a casual opportunity. And he added, we are pursuing the development of relations based on mutual respect and reciprocity with China, and that he believes there will be discussions to continue to develop Seoul-Beijing ties. And there was also a similar response coming from Beijing, as its foreign ministry spokesperson Wang Wonbin in a regular briefing said the two sides are maintaining communication through diplomatic channels to hold bilateral exchanges during a series of ASEAN-related foreign ministers' meetings. So why do they both see the need to get together? It's probably because recently we've been seeing the U.S. and China talking again. Recent meetings were held between U.S. and China, with the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken making a trip to China, and also U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen being there as well. Also, Korea and China have lots of issues at hand that need to be dealt with. They haven't held high-level talks for a while, and that over visa issuance restrictions, the Taiwan issue, controversial remarks made by Chinese ambassador to Seoul, Xing Haiming. I won't get into the details now here. If Park and Wang do get together, and they are likely to also address North Korea's advancement of nuclear and missile development, and also the trilateral security cooperation between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. Probably Beijing is not really fond of that. Also, Beijing is likely to seek ways to stabilize its supply chain network, especially amid China's recent curbs on overseas sales of gallium and germanium elements essential to making semiconductors. So, while many differences will remain, observers believe that the talks, if held, will be meaningful in that it will mean a restoration of senior-level diplomatic dialogue that was virtually suspended this year.
Yeah, the consensus is, despite these sour ties between Seoul and Beijing right now, especially because since the start of the Yoon administration, we've seen the South Koreans get a little bit closer to the United States or in Japan, and China hasn't been very happy with this, but still, the relations is much better compared to the U.S. and China. And as you mentioned, so U.S. right now, I mean, they're kind of in a pickle right now because they've decided to restrict the export of these key materials, right? You mentioned the gallium and germanium, which is very, very crucial in developing these semiconductors. And so being that right now, Seoul and Beijing, despite the fact that it has soured a bit, it's still relatively okay. And also, if you've noticed, and China has been kind of reaching out to Seoul saying, listen, I understand you guys are kind of inching closer to U.S., but our ties are very important. There's much that we need to talk about and so forth. And so hopefully these talks between the two sides here really, I guess, resolve some of the diplomatic row that we've seen in the few months here.
And I also just recently, I think, saw South Korea's Foreign Minister Park Jin on television during an interview mentioning that there's no reason for China and South Korea to, have these soured relations right now. And I think similar comments came from Beijing as well. And I just on a side note, the first time that I saw China's foreign minister or former foreign minister Wang Yi was actually at the ARF. And I did find that he's very charismatic. Why are you laughing, SJ?
Okay.
And I think back then he had bilateral talks with Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se, former Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se of South Korea. I just hope that there is going to be some chemistry between Park and Wang at the ARF this time around.
Well, we can argue that the sour ties between Seoul and Beijing happened because largely due to Washington, right? I mean, Washington has been sort of restricting Seoul from doing any. There was export controls on semiconductor goods. There was a number of issues, and so there was a lot of cases where there was nothing that Seoul could do because, I mean, it was Washington controlling everything, and so hopefully the charismatic Wang Yi holds good talks with the other charismatic fellow in Park Jin there. Let's move on, talk about other issues. As you know, President Yoon Suk-yeol has been very busy. Not only did he take part in the NATO summit, but also he made his official visit to Poland on Wednesday, following his attendance again at the NATO summit in Lithuania. Poland is seen as a key export hub in Europe for Korean batteries. Not to mention, we've been seeing Poland certainly importing a large number of military goods from South Korea as well. Some in-depth talks on economic cooperation are expected to take place between the leaders there. Ji, you have more.
All right, so Poland is a key bridgehead for Korean battery makers to enter the European market and has recently emerged as Korea's key trade partner in the region as well. Now, there are growing calls for strengthened strategic cooperation with the country through summit diplomacy as expectations rise for additional large-scale cooperation in defense, nuclear power plants, as well as the reconstruction of Ukraine. Now, according to the Korea International Trade Association and the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, Korea and Poland are rapidly developing economic ties in the area of electric vehicle batteries in particular. Now, a major turning point in the bilateral relationship between Korea and Poland, in fact, came in 2016. That's when LG Energy Solution built a 5 gigawatt hour automotive battery plant in Wrocław of Poland. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
You've probably done it a better job than I would have done.
Okay. So. And started operations the following year in this plant. And afterwards, its partners also expanded activities in the country, and Poland became home to the K battery cluster to target Europe, which is the world's second largest battery market. Now, trade statistics also clearly show how the battery sector has transformed the economic cooperation between the two countries, because Korea's exports to Poland surged to $7.86 billion last year. That's more than 2.5 times that of 2016, when Korean battery companies were yet to make full advances into the country. And last year, cathode materials accounted for 27.2%, with $2.14 billion of Korea's total exports going to Poland. And cathode materials are, as we know, processed in Korea before being sent for exports to local factories and made into battery cells.
Yeah, so we sort of forgot that Korea and Poland were collaborating so much on the battery sector, because after the war in Ukraine broke out, I mean, considering the fact that Poland does share a border with Ukraine, there was a whole lot of cooperation between the two countries kind of in the defense sector rather than the battery sector. And as I mentioned earlier, Poland has become a big buyer in Korea's military goods.
Right. So after the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war, the bilateral cooperation centered on batteries rapidly expanded into the defense sector as Poland decided to purchase a large number of Korean-made weapons. Now, Korea's arms exports to Poland last year stood at $410 million, and those in the first 5 months of this year stood at $340 million US dollars, and in just over a year, arms exports to Poland totaled $750 million, that is. And owing to cathode materials and defense exports, Korea saw a $6.77 billion of trade surplus with Poland last year. And so this made Poland Korea's seventh largest trade partner after Vietnam, the US, Hong Kong, India, Singapore, and the Philippines. And it has become a European partner, generating the largest trade surplus. And Poland is at the same time also accelerating investment in energy as well as transportation infrastructure and the environment using EU funds as well. And Korean companies are actively pursuing business participation in renewable energy, such as hydrogen and construction. And like I mentioned earlier, Poland borders Ukraine and is thus expected to play a key role in the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war, which draws much attention in the international community, including South Korea. So for this reason, there are increasing voices stressing the need and importance of building strategic cooperation with Poland in advance.
At the same time, President Yoon Suk-yeol having pledged for close cooperation with Poland in its support for Ukraine. So you have the details for this?
Right. So President Yoon made that vow when speaking to a Polish daily, the Rzeczpospolita. Correct me if I'm wrong with this one.
Again, you would have done a better job pronouncing that than I have.
Well, he did that as he embarked on his official visit to Poland, of course. So basically, he promised continued support for Ukraine through cooperation with Warsaw, referring to it as one of the front runners in supporting nations in Europe. Poland and Ukraine share borders again, and Poland has been one of the leading countries in providing strong political, economic, and military aid to Ukraine, as well as in lobbying efforts to implementing sanctions against Russia. President Yoon said that South Korea and Poland have spoken in one voice in driving international peace as value partners who defend freedom and democracy. He also mentioned that the partnership between Korea and Poland is not limited to the economic and trade sector, and expressed his wish to cooperation after the Ukraine war comes to an end, meaning in the peace, settlement, and reconstruction process. He also underlined that Poland has developed into one of the largest sources of Korea's trade surplus, as we mentioned, and that mostly thanks to the rise in exports in the defense sector. And he referred in specific to the scale of contracts for K2 tanks and K9 self-propelled howitzers. And this, due to this really mega deal signed last year, the deal being estimated at 20 trillion won, or roughly 15.6 billion US dollars. And that again actually being connected to President Yoon's pledge to support Ukraine, because we know that South Korea has been for a long time saying that it won't be supporting Ukraine with weapons. However, we've been seeing these trades going on with the countries nearby Ukraine that are helping Ukraine with weapons, such as Poland.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was kind of the thing where South Korea is indirectly, right, assisting them with these military-grade weapons. But it is interesting because all of sort of last year was when South Korea's exports of military goods have been kind of on the rise. And Poland was probably one of the first, if not the first countries out there to make these orders. And they were very aggressive with these purchases, and the orders went out very quickly. And Poland was very happy with the way that the orders were being processed. And so they were ordering more and more. And it seems like other current countries, especially in the Eastern European areas, they're very much keen on purchasing military goods from South Korea. So, the consensus right now is moving forward that South Korea main export moving forward. We've been seeing sort of a slowdown in the semiconductor sector, but export of military goods is going to be the next big thing for South Korea. So,
right. Just a big deal with Poland regarding these arms products is ranking Poland higher on the rank regarding South Korea's trade partners, then that really means that K-defense could really become big in the future.
And that's one country, right? There's one country. And so, the reports are saying that there are other countries that are very much keen on it. And so, it might not be on par with maybe some of like the German-made ones or the US-made ones, but it's, maybe just as good, but on a cheaper price is what the benefits of that. And it's made very fast. And that's what Poland was very, very surprised with.
Exactly.
We made the order a couple of months ago and it's already out there, right? Let's talk North Korea, because I jinxed it a couple of days ago. I said, man, North Korea, they're so quiet these days. I'm really enjoying the nice, peaceful, calm Korean peninsula. Well, a day after that, North Korea fired, at the time, what was reported as unidentified, but intercontinental ballistic missile. North Korea announced that it did test fire a new solid-fueled ICBM, the Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un reportedly inspected the launch site as well. No sign of his daughter Kim Joo-ae this time, but Chi, fill us in on the latest.
Sure. So North Korea conducted a test launch of a new solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile, the Hwasong-18, in the presence of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, according to the country's official newspaper, the Rodong Sinmun, and also its state media, the Korean Central News Agency. Now, this is the second time North Korea has test-fired a solid-fueled Hwasong-18. The first was back in April, and the media outlet also claimed that the missile ascended to a maximum peak altitude of over 6,600 kilometers and flew for about 74 minutes and 51 seconds for a distance of 1,200 kilometers, landing precisely in the targeted waters off the East Sea. Now, the test launcher said the first stage was set for a standard ballistic flight and the second and third stages for a high-angle flight, adding that it was fired at a high angle rather than a normal angle. And earlier, the South Korean military estimated that the missile fired by the North Korean government over the East Sea yesterday was a long-range ballistic missile, and Japan analyzed that the missile flew for 1 hour and 14 minutes, making it the longest flight time of any missile in history. Now, meanwhile, photos in North Korean media showed North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He was accompanied by his wife Lee Seol-ju and others at the test launch site, but this time there were no signs of his daughter Joo-ae.
So when we talked about this yesterday and the launch of the ICBM, we didn't say it was a solid-fueled Hwasong-18 ICBM just yet, but they were saying that it was in response to, the U.S. spy plane intruding over to the EEZ that, Kim Yo-jong was very much upset about. But North Korea explained their reason for why it launched the Hwasong-18, and it was not what we had initially expected, or at least this is the message that they gave out.
Right. So Pyongyang's media called the launch a part of strengthening its right to self-defense to thoroughly deter the hostile forces' dangerous military maneuvers. So in other words, it's part of the right of self-defense to respond to all the military threats from the United States and South Korea. It also pointed to the Washington Declaration, which outlined measures to strengthen deterrence against North Korea as the reason for their missile provocation. It cited specific reasons as well, such as the fact that the U.S. is plotting to use nuclear weapons against North Korea and that the U.S. is deploying nuclear submarines and nuclear strategic bombers to the Korean peninsula. And it also threatened to continue its military offensive against the United States as well as South Korea. And in this regard, the KCNA reported that Kim Jong-un affirmed that the DPRK will continue to carry out a series of powerful military offensives until the U.S. and South Korea recognize in despair the shameful defeat of their futile anti-DPRK hostility policy and abandon it. These are actually the expressions of the media outlet. And the launch of the Hwasong-18 also appears to be an attempt to build internal cohesion within North Korea, which failed to launch a reconnaissance satellite in May, given that Kim claimed success in a strategic weapon system test ahead of the 70th anniversary of the Victory Day on April 27th.
July 27th, I believe. They call it Victory Day. It's an Armistice Day. We call it Armistice Day, but North Korea goes, we won the war, and so they call it Victory Day. It's going to come out in July 27th in just a bit. So it is interesting, though. I mean, because yes, the failed reconnaissance satellite launch was, I guess, disappointing for North Korea, but it is kind of normal for some of the other countries out there with major space programs to fail their fair launch. But for many people out there wondering where the second launch is going to happen, I mean, right now is not the good time, right? It's monsoon season, weather is really bad, and it seems like North Korea yesterday, they picked the one day that it wasn't raining to shoot the ICBM. Right. So let's shift our focus to the economy this time. South Korea's central bank keeping its key interest rates unchanged. This for the fourth straight time on this Thursday. So let's get the latest.
Right. The Bank of Korea at its monetary policy meeting this Thursday announced another key interest rate freeze, maintaining it at 3.5% for the fourth straight time. So it has been at 3.5% in April, February, and May. So definitely a clear frozen path, if I may, following 7 hikes in a row since April last year. And the main reason for the freeze comes on the heels of a slow growth outlook and waning inflation. In a statement this Thursday, the central bank said, quote, going forward, domestic economic growth is expected to recover gradually, with private consumption continuing its modest recovery and exports improving due to the easing of the sluggishness in the IT industry. So expectations of a continuous freeze for the months to come is highly likely, and no more hikes, but also it's not being ruled out though, having in mind the U.S. Federal Reserve's rate increase as well as household debt issues. And we know there's currently, I think, a 1.75 percentage point gap between the U.S. and Korean interest rates. And in fact, after the policy setting meeting, BOK Governor Lee Chang-yong told reporters that every member of the Monetary Policy Board did keep open the possibility of raising the base rate to 3.75%.
So, this is the double-edged sword, right? Of having the Bank of Korea at least freeze their rates for the 4th consecutive time, at least for the borrowers, and there are many borrowers out there who went out there and purchased homes. It's good news that the rates aren't going up, but if you look at it in a different point of view, you have, so I mentioned, the gap in the interest rate between the Bank of Korea and the U.S. Federal Reserve, because it does seem like at this time, if the Bank of Korea is going to keep it, and they did, at 3.5%, the interest rate between the U.S. Fed is going to widen at 2% because the consensus is they have a FOMC meeting that is coming up later this month. The consensus is that they're going to raise it 25 basis points, hence the widening by 2 percentage points. 2% here. Jihee, let's get the details of this because we are keeping a close eye on the U.S. Fed as well.
Right. So like Soa said, the current differential of the interest rates between South Korea and the U.S. is 1.75 percentage points. This gap is already the largest on record. But if the U.S. Fed takes a baby step, which is a 25 basis point hike, as expected at its Federal Open Market Committee meeting on September 26th, the gap will widen to 2 percentage points. And in theory, if the benchmark interest rate is significantly lower than that of the U.S. for a currency that is not a reserve currency like the U.S. dollar, there's a greater risk of outflows of foreign investment funds in search of higher yields and a depreciation of the won. However, even after the interest rate differential widened to 1.75 percentage points, foreign bond funds continued to flow in, and the exchange rate remained relatively stable. And BOK's Governor Lee Chang-yong has repeatedly emphasized that the BOK does not mechanically respond to the Korea-U.S. interest rate differential. And he even urged the media to move away from the frame that the interest rate differential determines the exchange rate after the Monetary Policy Direction meeting in May. And most experts also agree that a rate differential of 2.0 percentage points is unlikely to disrupt foreign capital or exchange rate flows in the current environment.
Yeah, so I believe the U.S. CPI recently came out and it went down to what was it? It was, I think, 3%. 3% was what it was, and 3.0%. And this was below the market consensus of 3.1. So they're saying that the inflation in the United States is actually easing faster than what they had expected. And so they're expecting that because the U.S. Fed had said that there are going to be 2 more rate hikes till the end of this year. And now they're saying because the U.S. CPI is slowing down a lot quicker, that there's only going to be 1 rate hike, and which led to, the stocks going up and the U.S. dollar tumbling as well. But, the U.S. Fed is saying that, it's too early to tell. We could still hike it 2 times. And so still we have to keep a close tab on what's going on over in the U.S. Central Bank. Let's come back here in Korea because you had the medical workers walkout involving tens of thousands of members of the medical union that are demanding better working conditions. So tell us what the strike is about and how this is going to impact the general public.
Yes, so this is the Korean Health and Medical Workers Union that went out for a strike. It's a 2-day general strike, so Thursday and Friday. It started at around 7 a.m. this morning and involved some 45,000 nurses, nursing aides, caregivers, medical technicians, pharmacists, therapists, and other health personnel and members of the union nationwide. The union has 85,000 members. Now, despite the rain, they took to the streets, including Gwanghwamun Square in downtown Seoul, and they also held pre-rallies on Wednesday. So the main gist is they are demanding for an expansion of medical personnel and are criticizing the government for not complying with an agreement made in 2021 to hire more medical personnel and to improve their working environment. I don't know if you guys remember back then, 2021 was when we were in the midst of COVID-19, right? So that's where we need a lot of medical staff. So back then, I think they came to a short-term compromise and asked the government to, in the future, come up with that expansion and get back to talks. But the medical workers' argument currently is that the number of medical staff has to be enlarged in order to guarantee the safety of patients. Now, this is the first time in 19 years that they have gathered for a general strike. 2004 was the last time. Back then, they called for a 5-day work week system. And I mentioned 45,000 took to the demonstrations, but excluding essential personnel, such as those working for emergency rooms, they did not participate.
Right.
Nevertheless, there was a significant personnel shortage felt, and also an impact is even inevitable at emergency rooms because personnel necessary for related procedures, such as examinations that emergency patients need to go through, have joined the strike as well. Now, while the top 5 hospitals in the capital Seoul did not take part, 18 out of 45 general hospitals deemed high-level hospitals nationwide joined the strike. And the National Cancer Center, for instance, canceled all of its scheduled surgeries for 2 days. That's some 100 surgeries. And Busan National University Hospital sent some of its patients to other medical facilities.
That's why, I mean, it's hard to take sides with this, right? Because I think also a large number of people do agree that, especially like nurses, they get very much underpaid for the amount of work that they do, including other medical staffs as well. But at the same time, it is impacting some of the patients out there. So as this is going to be a two-day strike, right?
Yeah.
We'll continue to keep a close tab on this. We're going to end things out, as always, with some weather updates. We are expected to see more downpours of rain nationwide through the next few days. There are even related warnings have been being issued in some parts with high risk of damage. We do understand that in the Seoul metropolitan region, overnight, it is going to rain a whole lot as well. Chihi, round this out with the latest weather updates.
Right. So up to 400 millimeters or more of rain is expected to fall, especially in the Chungcheongnam-do and Jeollabuk-do provinces until the 15th, amid rainy weather in most areas of the country. And this is according to the Korea Meteorological Administration. They had a forecast briefing made earlier today. Not only are we expected to see large amounts of overall downpours, but also an intense concentration of hourly precipitation as well. And while the weather agency warned the public to prepare for possible damages caused by the consecutive days of heavy rain, we've already seen reports of damages here and there. So in Gwangju, gas to apartments were cut off, and the airport train stopped for 5 minutes at Geyang Station. And across the country, there were reports of small and large traffic accidents as well on the roads as well. And meanwhile, President Yoon, who's visiting Poland at the moment, ordered a transgovernmental response to the continued rainy weather. And all of you, too, if you're driving or just going back from work, please do be careful on the way back.
That's right. And of course, our Arirang radio announcers are going to continue to give out the emergency reports for all of our listeners as well. Guys, thank you very much for your report. Please get back safe, and we'll see you guys again.
Thank you.
See you again.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.